are living in really uncertain times with very unusual things that are happening to everybody. Things that we thought never ever happen. And it's quite interesting to see how people respond to this. Most people that I've seen go into a little huddle, make sure all their family and their closest family are together, and then they stick together and they hope to ride out the wave of uncertainty. They think that somehow it's possible for them to be able to save themselves if they can just stay together, turn a blind eye to everything that's happening in the world, and stick isolated in their small little huddle. It's very interesting that most of these people who act in this way also claim to be trusting in God. This kind of behavior is squarely rooted in fear and completely opposite to the way that God demands us to live. God never, ever thought anyone would have to live in isolation by themselves. God placed every single person in a community of believers. Because God knows this: when we become isolated, when we don't hear the word preached to us, what happens is we become deceived. We start getting into this horrible cycle. We become isolated. We don't hear the word. We then start to think somehow I can make a plan to save myself. That is pride. And this plan, in this particular case scenario that we're living in, is isolating myself from everybody who can possibly be a threat to my health. And the more isolated I become, the less I hear of the word. The less I hear of the word, the more fear comes. The more fear comes, the harder I try to make my plan. The more I isolate, the less word I hear. And it's this whirlpool of deception, and it's spiraling into a great abyss that will cause much more damage to you and your family than any virus ever can. It will cause you to drift away from where God wants you to be. The great news for us is it doesn't have to stay like this. We don't have to get caught up in this whirlpool of deception. There is a way to break out of it. And the way out of it is to humble yourself before your God. To say, my way will not be the way, your way will be done. To realize that you're not the big know-it-all. None of us can say, well, I've got it all together. I won't fall into deception. I can make it on my own. The Bible says if you trust in yourself, you're under a curse. You can't save yourself. No person can save you. No government, no politician can save you. No doctor, no medical aid. Nothing can save you except Jesus. And you display your trust in Jesus by obeying His command of being part of a community that He calls the church. A community where people can come and speak the word to you. Highlight to you where you are missing it. If you isolate and withdraw yourself, you cut off God's hands from helping you. You bring the curse on yourself and you think you will be saved. It will not happen. When you isolate, when you withdraw, when you trust in yourself, the same thing will happen to you than what happened to Saul. Saul was a man of God, chosen by God to be the king, to be the head, the representative of the people whom God chose as his own witness here on earth. God chose the Israelites, and he chose Saul to be the head, the king of that nation. If we can think of anybody that should be exempt from the possibility of deception, surely it is a man like this. A man who's clearly got the favor of God on his life, chosen by God. But we see, unfortunately, in Saul's life, very quickly after his reign started, there was something that was against him. And the thing that was against him is he did not grow in his dominion over fear and over pride. And it caused great deception. At one time, Jonathan, Saul's son, attacked the Philistines. Now the Philistines had a much superior army than the Israelites did. They had much superior chariots and iron weaponry, which the Israelites didn't have. And because of Jonathan's attack on the Philistines returned, and they wanted to attack the Israelites. Now, Saul had an agreement. He had to wait for Samuel. And for Samuel to come to offer the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings. But Samuel took a little bit longer than what Saul had hoped it would be. And the men under Saul's command were freaking out. They were running for the hills. And what did Saul do? How did he respond in this situation? Did he respond out of fear? Or did he respond out of faith, trusting God with great humility? Join me now as we're going to read the story. Pick up the story in 1 Samuel chapter 13 from verse 5. 1 Samuel chapter 13 from verse 5, and I'm reading from the NIV. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel. 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard pressed, they hid in caves and thickets, among rocks and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal. And Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. "What have you done?" Samuel asked. Saul replied, "When I saw the men were scattering and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." "You acted foolishly," Samuel said. "You've not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him leader over his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command. What a sad story. And the great warning for us is, if it can happen with Saul, it surely can happen to any one of us, if it hasn't already happened to all of us. You see, Saul was in a very, very difficult situation. No one ever doubts that. But Saul knew the stories. He knew the stories of how great God's acts of salvation was to the Israelites. He knew the story of Gideon, who defeated his enemies with just 300 men, an army much stronger than he was. He knew the stories about God opening up the Red Sea. He knew all these stories, but there was this thing, this evil, this enemy that was living inside of Saul's body that was causing him to lose all the blessing that God had for him. It was not God's plan from the beginning of time to remove the kingdom from Saul. It was not God's desire for Saul's story to end like this. It was not as if God forced Saul to act out of fear. God pleaded, and He pleads with all of us to trust Him. You can see here that Samuel says, God gave a command to Saul, and the command was not a loud voice out of the heavens somewhere. The command was from the mouth of the person who was with Saul. It was from Samuel that command of the Lord was given. The prophets, the people who hear God. Who do you know who hears God around you? Don't be so arrogant and so prideful like Saul was to think you're the main guy. Saul thought, well, Samuel's not here. We're in trouble. I better make a plan. I'm the anointed one of God. I don't need anybody else. I'm it. Don't do that. God's plan from the beginning was for you to be part of a people who together know the mind of the Lord. You see, fear, if left unchecked, mostly causes pride, thinking that I will save it, I will do it, I will. You see, Saul argued, man, I'm worshiping God. I am bringing a sacrifice. God says, obedience is better than sacrifice. Faith in God is not displayed by your sacrifice. Faith in God is displayed by how much you obey Him, by how much you trust Him in the most difficult and unusual circumstances that you can find yourself in. What are you going to do? Are you going to be like Saul? I can do it. And even quote, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Or are you going to say, I know what my God has said. I know where He's brought me to. And I know His salvation is in the midst of His people. God has a plan for us. And that plan's got nothing to do with isolation. Isolation causes a deadly combination of destruction to come over your life. If you're going to isolate yourself, you will have less of the Word. You will have more pride. And your deception will become greater and greater. Every moment, every day that you choose to withdraw, that you choose to isolate, it becomes more and more difficult to break through your hardened heart. The only way out is for God to send somebody to you to highlight your deception, to speak the word to you. That is it, guys. That is God's plan. And if you choose to withdraw, you cannot hear the word. You cannot receive the grace of God coming to you. There can be no faith. You're only left with fear. In this situation where we're facing us right now, most people think the biggest danger for them is a virus, COVID-19. That is by no means the biggest danger in your life. It doesn't even compare to the destructive force called isolation. In this time, people are claiming that they are isolating themselves because of government regulation. This is simply not the case. When you look through lives time and time again, you will see in your own life that you add laws to keep yourself safe that the government doesn't require. You will go over and above the normal government regulations, not because it's government regulations. You will go past that because of fear. For example, let's look at nannies. When I speak to people and say to them, if you have a job that permits you to work under level 4 lockdown situations, which we are in now, and you have children, you're allowed to get your nanny back into work. But the response I get from them is, well, you know, the nanny is going to use a taxi. So she's going to be exposed to a lot of people in a confined space. That means me and my family are in greater danger of getting the virus. You can clearly see that the government has decided at the present time the risk is small enough to allow nannies to return to work if need be. But because of your fear, you cannot act on that. You want to set a bar higher than what the government says. And you claim you're obedient to the government, that's why. It's not the case. It's because you're afraid. Let's think about another one. Counseling. Under level 4 lockdown, counselors are allowed to bring the word, to minister the word. You haven't had the word spoken in an environment where you're present for 6 weeks. You wonder if you need counseling? Of course you do. But people don't take up the opportunity for counseling. Do you know why? Because you think the counselor goes to many homes. So if one of those people has got the virus, the counselor is going to get the virus and they're going to bring it to me. Rather not, thank you, Burger, I'm not interested. Once again, your own rules, you place that above the government, and you can't see that you're acting in fear. How do you react when people seem to not want to comply to the laws as stringently and as extremely as you do? How do you feel when you see that? Do you think, oh, those people must watch out because the government doesn't carry the sword for nothing and it's safer to obey the government? Or do you become angry at them? Most people who have anything to say about them actually speak anger. Why do you think that is? The anger is a mask for the fear. You think, I'm so afraid that I'm going to possibly, if the whole country, if the whole world doesn't comply exactly to these regulations, then the virus is going to continue to spread and I am going to get it. It's got nothing to do with obeying the government. It's got everything to do with you not having dominion over fear. Another way, if you still don't agree, if you still don't believe me, is how do you react to the news of the economic impact of this virus? When you hear of the devastation caused, what do? This is the response of fear. We all have sacrifices to make. Unfortunately, I've only heard that response from people with a full tummy. You think you are safe because of your economic security. Unfortunately, the Bible speaks very strongly against trusting in your own wealth. It says, you who are rich, your wealth will pass away like a wild flower. Do not trust in your riches. Do not think because your salary is intact, you and your family will be kept safe. The only thing that will keep you safe is faith displayed in obedience to God. So what should we do in this situation? How should we react? Well, use every opportunity as given to you by the government. If the government allows you to get counseling, for goodness sake, do it. Jesus said, where 2 or 3 meet together, there he is present. I understand these virtual church sessions that we have is incredibly necessary for us now, but you can't live on this. You need the word spoken to you in person. That is the job of a counselor in the church. And every elder in the church, every house church leader has got a permit to legally come and bring you the word. Take up that opportunity. Make sure that you don't miss any of the trainings that's going on. In this time where you're bombarded with fear, every article on the news sites are all about fear. It is incredibly important for you to have a consistent flow of the word being spoken to you. This is what will save you. Man does not live on bread alone, but every word spoken from the mouth of God. Virtual church and virtual messages go so far. Make a plan. Get together with your church leader, your house church leader, where you can hear the word. We are here. This is our job, and we're not afraid. We're not afraid because we trust in our God. We do not forsake meeting together. I'm not talking about big church, but I'm talking about one-on-one, one-on-two. These are permitted. Use the opportunity. You know, just after Saul, the greatest king in the history of Israel was revealed. That was David. David was a man after God's own heart. David was a humble man. When a difficult situation came, David went to seek the Lord, not from himself, not thinking, well, I can hear the word of the Lord, I've got the Bible. David constantly went to the prophets around him and submitted himself to the word spoken by God's prophets. You can see various examples where David was about to go into make big mistakes, but that deception was broken over him. He could turn away from it because he came under the word. He did not isolate himself from the spoken word of God. He submitted himself to God and God's plans, which has always been to be part of a body of believers where he can use many people to bring the word to you. I urge you, lift your eyes and see the importance of getting the word from a person in a consistent manner. If you don't, you will drift away. Your heart will become cold. You will get full of fear, full of pride. You will lose the blessing of God, and you're going to blame God for it. I tell you now, it's not His fault. God has a plan. He's got a way out. But it requires you to humble yourself and agree with His ways. His ways is the word spoken in small groups. God bless you.